Good morning and welcome to another Conversation with Kelly Diamond. You can catch me every Thursday at, 9:30 Eastern Time and 6:30 a.m. Pacific Time. Also, my written word normally rolls out Mondays on globalwealthprotection.com, but this week it rolled out the other night, so check it out. Anyway, so the issue of fairness is a regular recurring theme in most political conversations. And I find it rather ironic that we would call upon government to administer this fairness, this concept of fairness, and equality, right? It's kind of like Don Quixote and his windmills, I think. You're chasing down something that inherently just doesn't exist in order for there to be equality, this pie in the sky equality and this pie in the sky fairness. Then the only thing you can do equally to everyone without infringing or imposing upon anybody is nothing, right? That's the fairest thing you could do, is nothing, because it's benign, right? There's no actual crime. There's no infringements. There's no inconveniences. There's no impositions. It's just, here, I will equally do nothing for everyone, and there's that. So now anything you do beyond that breaks that balance. So now you don't have the fairs. You don't have fairs anymore. But I would say that with that aside, now I look at perhaps a sense of equitability, right? And say that we can at least be equitable, that at least give everybody a fair opportunity. Or we try to find something in there that could maybe appease our sense of fairness. So of course, the first and most obvious example, or at least the one that's most popular, is using Walmart as as a sorry, my computer's all over the place. Using Walmart as the scapegoat example, demonstrating that they're all but the spawn of Satan, you name it, all the epithets for Walmart, because obviously they make a lot of money. They make the most amount of money. I think they're the top earners of American corporations, and they're also the largest and highest taxpayer in the United States. But we don't want to talk about that. The fact that they pay the most amount of tax in the United States doesn't mitigate the fact that they don't pay enough. Right? It's still not a fair amount that they pay. It's not fair. Well, I would argue that what's not fair is that they have to pay it at all. Right? But when it comes to a tax regime, I don't understand how the argument of what's a fair amount for someone to steal could be. Right? I mean, how do we argue that? How do you argue that it's fair to steal from anybody the fruits of their labor? I don't get that argument at all. So when when Ireland rolled out, initially had this weird caveat, this precious loophole in its tax code called the double Irish. And Apple, Google took advantage of that, because not only did Ireland have a low corporate tax of 12.5%, it still does. It also had this loophole that said that you could take it offshore, and so long as it was an Irish entity, they don't tax their own offshore. So when all was said and done, billions were saved. Apple saved, over the course of 2 years, something close to 12 billion with a B in tax. Okay. That's a lot of freaking cash to save in a tax loophole. Not to say that they didn't pay taxes. They still paid something like 2.7 or 3% or something. But the way Ireland finagled it was that ultimately all the taxes would be funneled to Ireland rather than sharing any of it with the UK. Okay. Which I thought was clever. I mean, it was a win-win for everybody in this one, right? I mean, such as taxes can be a win for anybody. Well, the EU freaked out. That's not fair to have competitive tax rates. It's not fair that you would have a lower tax rate than us. Oh, it's not fair to get into a price war? That's interesting. When customers shop, they have absolutely no problem. And even the diehard socialists would argue that a poor person shopping for the lowest price makes sense. That nobody can argue with the fiscal sense tied to price shopping. So nobody can argue then of the merits of a price war, right? So they get into a price war over taxes, and now it's unfair that they're taxing so low. Well, what's it to you? I mean, of all the bailout EU countries, it's only Ireland that's turned the ship around. Cyprus is fucked. France ain't changing. Portugal and Spain, I mean, I think the only reason why Portugal legalized drugs was because they didn't have the financial bandwidth to fight that war anymore. Greece is still fucked. I mean, so these bailout countries in the EU are suffering. Ireland also got a bailout, only maybe 5-ish years ago, and they're turning it around. They lowered their tax regime. They're inviting businesses to their country, and they're starting to thrive. Now, we could take a lesson from it, which would be a benefit, right? Which would be nice. Or we can ignore it, in which case we're just being benign. We're not condemning. We're not accepting. We're just saying, hey, you're doing your thing. To each their own, right? Or we can condemn it like the EU, right, as saying it's unfair. But how many times has it been argued that when money gets involved in any sort of activity conducted by the private citizenry, how many times has it been argued that it's unfair? Look at the United States recently, right? There was I forget what the measure was called, but there was a time where, and I think there's something, the word fair and market is in the name of the legislation that remedied this unfairness. But basically, brick and mortar company businesses were paying, retail centers especially, were paying state sales tax, had to incorporate state sales tax into their price points at the register, at the point of sale, whereas online companies did not have to do that. Right? And so these retailers are saying it's unfair because we have an 8% disadvantage over our online competition. Now, who set up that disadvantage? The fucking state did. It's not Amazon's fault. There's a sales tax. I mean, they've found ways to work around it. They've found ways to mitigate costs and put warehouses in strategic metropolitan areas to bring down costs. But at the end of the day, there's no tax. There was no tax anyway for online businesses. I don't know if it passed since I last looked at it, but that was just within the last year. There was this whole brouhaha over sales tax and how unfair it is that online businesses aren't paying. So then legislators are saying this isn't fair. We should tax online businesses too. Wait. The more fair thing to do would be not to impose on anybody, right? That's the fair thing. The fair thing is that you don't rob anybody of their money. Don't put anybody at an 8% disadvantage. So anyway, there's that. Then there was Uber, Lyft, and Sidecar came out and turned the, I guess, private sector transportation industry on its ear. Basically took ride sharing and carpooling and put a price tag on it. Built an online app network, and you just call up whoever and somebody gets sent over to your house and takes you to wherever you need to go. which is not the same as a cab because they don't have a meter. It's, so the price structure that I know of is that they put a suggested donation price on their app, and then you can pay more, you can offer less, and see if anybody comes. That's kind of how it is. Kind of like Priceline, name your own price, and then people will come and get you. Well, the problem is that apparently it was a violation of a California law that says you can't charge, you can't have people splitting fares for different distances, and some weird thing. Apparently somebody thought of this. You can't charge a different fare for somebody traveling, picking you up along the way and splitting the fare and this, that, and the other. It was, anyway, they worked around it since, but essentially cab drivers are saying this is unfair because we have to go through all of these regulatory processes and these licensing processes and pay for all this stuff, and they don't. So that's not fair. Of course it's going to cost more to take a cab, and yeah, okay, but that's not Uber's fault, right? Whose fault is it that there are all these onerous regulations and licensing and certifications and permits and whatnot to operate a cab? That wasn't Uber's fault. Uber didn't offer that. The state did. The same state that imposes an 8% burden on brick and mortar retailers is the same entity that is imposing these regulations. And thus far, right, to say we need to regulate Uber and Lyft when there hasn't been any need to do so. So far, everything's been on the up and up, and there hasn't been any complaints. So why regulate something that hasn't disturbed the market in any meaningful way? Well, you have your establishment industry people who have become complacent, and then they get, a new competitor comes into the market, into their industry, and they don't know what to do. They have been so lazy and complacent this entire time with regards to the product that they're offering the market, and they kind of thought, yeah, how can you possibly change a cab business? Somebody found a way, and now they're up against a huge competitor, and they're not technically the same. Yeah, the same with drugs, right? We've got our categories and lists of what is a narcotic. Okay, well, I'm going to create something new that's not on the list, and now it's unregulated. It's technically not illegal. So they keep reinventing and they keep coming out and say, well, that's not fair. This is the constant issue that people are having. And so when Walmart, right, makes the money that it makes, I'll take the two CEOs. Let's look at just the two CEOs. Now I wrote down I just looked it up real quick because it's almost public knowledge, at this point. For better or for worse, what their annual compensation is. So for Costco, the CEO makes $5.4 million a year total compensation. He has 174,000 employees. Okay. I'm not trying to create word problems here. I'm going to do all the math. So don't worry. There's a train leaving Chicago at 55 miles an hour, headed eastbound, right? All that. So for Walmart, the CEO makes $25.6 million. So makes about 5 times more than the Costco CEO. And employs, and this is global CEO, and employs 2.2 million people around the world. Okay. So that's a lot more employees. But check it out. The Costco CEO employs 174,000 people, makes $5.4 million a year. And that amounts to about $31 and change per employee per year that this CEO makes. He makes $31 a year per employee. Okay, 31. The CEO, Walmart, who employs 2.2 million people around the world makes $11.50 per year per employee. Makes a third of what the Costco CEO makes off of each employee. Okay. Now, you can take the 25 million, the 25 million that this CEO makes, and essentially you could give, he could just not make any money, okay, and give everybody an $11.50 raise per year. That's what would happen if the Walmart CEO made $0. Okay. He could give everybody an $11.50 per year raise. So getting uppity about the CEO's income is a little silly, I think. Right? Because there's nothing he can directly do out of his own pocket even to move the needle for any of these people who are working at Walmart wages, whatever they might be. Now, albeit, there are some earners who make more, and there's some who make less, whatever. But the basic idea is that, it's not like there's 2 million of the 2.2 million that are all high-end executives making millions of dollars, right? That's never the case. So there's that. But to say, that's not fair that the CEO of Costco or the CEO of Walmart makes $25 million a year. He makes more per hour than most employees make in a year, and that's unfair. Okay, yeah, it's not the same, that's for sure, and there certainly is a big difference in what he makes versus what the average employee makes. But I would say that if you look at labor as nothing more than just another commodity and another resource that a business needs to operate. If you work at a lumber yard and you sell lumber, lumber is the raw materials that you're selling, right? So everything else, the machinery, the electricity, the fuel, the whatever other, I have no idea what goes into a lumber yard, honestly. But whatever resources it takes to run a lumber yard, the business is going to try and find the lowest price to keep the margins up and keep its prices competitive, right? Well, likewise, when it comes to labor, it's no different. They're buying a product called labor, which is no different than having to buy flour for a baker. You're buying something that you need to make the company operate, move. Baker has nothing to sell if they don't have flour and sugar and eggs, right, and vanilla. They got nothing to sell, so they might as well close their doors. And if they don't have anybody to bake, if there's nobody that's willing to do the baking, nobody willing to do the prep, and nobody willing to do the cleanup, and nobody willing to do the things that are necessary to keep a bakery going, then they might as well close their doors. So flour and eggs to a baker, and their bakers, the actual people who do the baking, and their employees are all equally important. Okay, but they come at different price points. The cost of flour is considerably cheaper than the cost of a person, right? And then the cost of machinery and the cost of electricity ultimately come out to be cheaper often than a person who performs the same tasks. So labor is the most expensive resource that employees, especially in the United States, and especially in places like, Europe, where you're paying a minimum wage that's well over $10 an hour. Now, granted, tax regime is completely different. But nonetheless, okay, you have this. But the irony is that Walmart is doing what Costco sells. Walmart Walmart's business practices are doing exactly what Costco's model sells. Think about it. If I go to Costco and I buy my Snickers bars there, granted, I have to buy, you know, several thousand of them, but I no longer pay 50 cents a bar. I now pay 39 cents a bar. Same Snickers bars, same Snickers. This is not generic brand. This is brand name Snickers bar. If I buy one at the point of sale, it's something like 79 cents. If I buy in bulk from Costco, Costco still makes their money, as does Mars, the Mars company, the Mars candy company or chocolate company. They also make their money. They still make their money. Only now I have them at a lower price point per bar, but I have to pay up front, obviously, and commit to a certain volume, right? If you ever go onto Alibaba.com and try to look at price points for various things being made in China, made to order in China, you can order direct, factory direct, if you're willing to buy an MOQ, minimum order quantity, of 5,000, right? So if you're running one of those vending machine companies that, you sell the little toys to the kids at the front of the grocery store, buying 5,000 is almost a cakewalk. You go and buy 5,000 of these little cute things, these little marketable things. You're buying them at 5 cents a piece. You're selling them for 50 cents a piece, right? Per item. But I bought them from China for 5 cents a piece. And the factory still makes its money. And I make my money. So it's called buying and doing business in volume, right? And the price goes down as you commit to the volume. I don't have to worry about if somebody else is going to buy the other 4,999 units. I've sold all 5,000 units up front. The same setup costs, right? All the things that I have to do to create this one thing, I still have to do for 5,000. It doesn't matter how many you order. There's certain costs that are associated with production that I have to incur whether I sell you one or I sell you 5,000. So you make it worth my while. And what happens is the setup costs and the fixed costs get amortized over a larger volume, and the price goes down. Same with shipping, right? The cost of shipping per unit goes down. So what does Walmart do? Well, Walmart buys its employees in volume, so it pays less per employee, has more employees, makes less per employee, but makes more on the volume. And that's essentially what Costco sells. Costco sells bulk and volume buying, right? They sell value. What they're saying is that I can now get you this candy bar for a fraction of the price that you were paying had you bought one at the point of sale at a Walmart. And they can. Their products per unit are cheaper in many cases. Now, Walmart also has Sam's Club, mind you, which does the same thing. But Costco pays its employees something like $11, $14 an hour, right? But it has a fraction of the amount of employees that Walmart has. It has a fraction of the number of retail locations that Walmart and Sam's Club have. So they're operating at a much smaller scale, and then they're paying more for their employees. Their hours, Costco's hours are stupid. They're almost impossible they're almost impossible as a customer to make it. They open at like 11 or 10 o'clock. Walmart's open 24 hours a day. Costco closes at anywhere between 6 and 8 o'clock. Their operating hours are bullshit. I mean, they're most inconvenient. They operate on a smaller scale, and they pay more for their employees. Well, if you buy on a smaller scale, you pay more too. Small scale operations cost more. Smaller businesses who try to compete, smaller retailers and smaller grocers who try to compete with large big box companies are smaller operations. Their cost and their overhead is higher per employee, per location. Okay? That's how it works. So Walmart is simply operating in volume, which we never condemn when it's the consumer doing it. When the consumer finds the bargains and the consumer pays less and the consumer pays, gets something undervalued, nobody seems to care. But when a business does it with their employees, it's something different. And I don't understand why. If you're buying labor, the fact that it's a person performing the labor, when a machine does the labor, you don't care that he got, that a factory finds a machine, and picks over a failed factory and says, okay, well, I'll pay, 20% less than market value for that because you got to get it out of here and I'm willing to pay to get it out of here, et cetera, et cetera. I'm getting this machine at a bargain. It's producing widgets for me at half a cent per widget. So nobody cares when you buy a machine that produces at 20 cents an hour. But we care when a person does the same work for 20 cents an hour. We care that a man gets paid 25 cents an hour and a woman gets paid 20 cents an hour. That's unfair. But when a woman makes 20 cents an hour and a machine can do it for 10 cents an hour, we get upset that the woman is still making 20 cents an hour, despite the fact that there are machines that can operate at a far more efficient rate than the woman. Right? This notion of fairness is so backwards and so illogical and so irrational. Now, is it right that someone be left to live off of the wages that they get? Is it right that they only have enough to barely pay their expenses? If that's the issue, then that's the issue. But the issue isn't to go to the employer and complain about the person who is providing the livelihood for these individuals and giving them some resources with which to operate. Okay? The fact that they're victims of their circumstances and their circumstances are more expensive than what they're bringing in, that's not the employer's fault. It's not the employer's fault you have 5 kids. Unless they sired each and every one of them, in which case they might be responsible for that. But I'm going to assume they're not. It's not Walmart's fault that you have 5 kids at home. It's not Walmart's fault that rent is $850 a month. This is all not Walmart's responsibility. They're not even the landlords. Right? So we talk about what's fair, and this notion that it's unfair that businesses operate exactly the same way as customers do, except on a larger scale, that they're looking for the same bargains we are. Faulting the businesses for not providing benefits, faulting the businesses for not compensating the employees based on their needs and not based on their talents, that's failed thinking. Everybody's pointing to these success stories of higher minimum wages, like Denmark, or even in certain states where they've raised the minimum wage, but where they raised the minimum wage and where they crack down on low-wage earners because of the same thing. When you attack the minimum wage, you attack the low-wage earner, the unskilled, the uneducated, the low-skilled, the inexperienced worker. You attack them. Okay, you don't know. If you don't know that by now, you've disqualified them and priced them out of the market. They're not worth $10 an hour. They're not worth $15 an hour. So they're not going to get the job. Not when somebody who's worth $15 an hour comes in and says, yeah, I'll do it. I can do all this shit. Oh, well, if I can get $20 an hour of work from you for $15 an hour, why on earth am I going to hire somebody who can't do the work, doesn't know how, needs the training, isn't as good at this job as you are? Why would I pay them $15 an hour to get $10 an hour worth of work out of me? It makes no sense. Right? No customer, no consumer shops that way. Not even the most liberal. The most liberal people out there still boast about the garage sales where they find this undervalued Tiffany lamp that was supposed to be $150. They got it for $15. They boast about deals that they find. And we're all supposed to be giving each other high fives, but then when corporations do it, we get upset. Why? Finding a deal is finding a deal. Finding value is finding value. And bringing value is bringing value. And we don't blame employers for the circumstances, the unaffordable circumstances of their employees. It's not the employer's fault they racked up debt. It's not the employer's fault they signed a contract for a new car they couldn't afford. It's not the employer's fault they have 5 kids. It's not the employer's fault that they want to live in a certain apartment complex they can't afford. It's not the employer's fault. So they are not responsible for that. The employer is buying labor at an hourly wage or at a salary rate, and that's that, right? It's not fair is when we apply different standards to the same practice based on scale. When we say you make so much money, you should be taxed more. When a corporation finds a bargain on labor, they should be condemned. When an individual, as a consumer, finds a bargain, we should praise them and high five them. The different standards applied, the double standards applied to individuals versus businesses, expecting that individuals aren't running that? I mean, you think the person who's running Costco is any less of a consumer because he's sitting in with a title called CEO? No, you can't. You don't turn it off. Anyway, if we're going to talk about fairness, apply the same standard. Leave everybody alone or apply the same standard. But holding people to different standards based on the volumes that they operate at or the scales in which they operate at, to me, I mean, they didn't, look in the mirror for iniquity and unfairness, same standards, or you're the reason why shit's unfair. Have a good week. Talk to you next time. Bye.